So I'm really pleased to be joined by Brian Little, who's the Director of Labor Affairs for the California Farm Bureau Federation, and the COO of the Farm Employers Labor Service. Is that correct?
That's right.
I got the name right. And he's formerly a Deputy Assistant Secretary in the Department of Labor, in the Bush Department of Labor. That's a big difference from the current Department of Labor, where he was Deputy Assistant Secretary for OSHA matters. So Brian, great to be with you this morning.
Well, thanks for inviting me to come down.
So let's dig deeper into this process that I was talking a little bit. What are these talks that have been going on at the 30,000 foot level? I know you were part of them.
A lot of what's been going on at the 30,000 foot level, I think, originated with a realization on the part of a lot of our colleagues at state farm bureaus across the country that we were at a point where we needed to try to do what we could to encourage the industry to reunify around a single idea. There was a point in time about 2005 or so where everybody was unified behind the ag jobs proposal. I was fortunate enough when I was at American Farm Bureau before I was in the Department of Labor to be one of the people that helped to develop that and to get it to where it became something that the industry could get behind. In the intervening years, though, conditions changed. New administration had a different attitude toward the H-2A program, and I think some of the things that the administration has done with the H-2A program have made it clear to a lot of people that it's not going to be the solution that the industry is going to need over the long term. So that led us to starting to talk to our State Farm Bureau colleagues in other states, particularly the heavy ag labor user states, about what we might be able to do. What we wound up with, after a lot of discussion, several meetings, a lot of moving paper back and forth, trying to figure out who liked what and who didn't like what. I think we came up with something that at the end of the day, in many ways, looks a lot like ag jobs, has some of the best features of ag jobs, but also has I think, a significantly improved future flow program. That wound up, I think, being in many ways the key component. So after that ad hoc working group of State Farm Bureau and American Farm Bureau staff came up with a report, we passed it on to the AFBF board, they blessed it, they thought it was a good starting point, and by the way, it was never anything more, starting point. And then our folks in Washington started shopping it around to their colleagues in DC, and I think the result of that was the formation of the Agricultural Workforce Coalition. And if you guys haven't found that on the web yet, I'd urge you to go and Google it. It is the primary umbrella organization that all of the ag groups in DC are working under right now to take our case to Capitol Hill and talk to lawmakers about what the industry thinks that it needs in terms of immigration reform. That includes all the major BC national ag groups, the American Farm Bureau, the Acre Coalition that has been for years the primary backer of the ag jobs bill, and the folks that kind of kept the fire alive for all those years when, the funny thing about immigration reform is that it seems like the opportunity to do something meaningful comes along about once every generation. The last time we did something, maybe two. The last time we did something really big was IRCA in '86. I think the '96 immigration bill arguably was more of a backslide than progress moving forward. So now here we are with some opportunities potentially after this past election when one major national party recognized that, as Marco Rubio, I thought, put it very eloquently, that it's very hard to have a discussion with people about your common values when they think you want to deport their mother. And so I think that party's recognized that it needs to change and needs to change its attitude. Since Prop 187 here in California, some folks have been trying to convince Hispanic voters that not only do we not want you to be here, we'd be just as happy if you left, and by the way, we don't care if you vote for us. And guess what? They haven't.
Okay, so what I'm hearing are two big themes: unity, a new unity that didn't exist before, and an improvement over the old proposal because it's more focused on future flow. Not just the workers already here, but the workers going to come in the future.
I would say it's more focused on future flow because there has to be a balance between those two things. We have to do something with the workers that we have here in country now that are key parts of our industries and our agricultural businesses in cities like Fresno and rural areas all up and down the San Joaquin Valley. Without those people, if we have to do E-Verify tomorrow and we don't have some way to get those people legalized, in many ways we're essentially out of business.
Okay, but so we understand that they're equal parts, the people already here and the people coming in the future. But the new focus is future flow, correct? I mean, that's what you said yourself, with the new.
I think we recognized the important thing was to get a future flow program that was actually that actually could work for the large mass of growers out there and employees out there who might actually need to use it at some point in the future.
And so what, just, I understand, I mean, everybody in the room understands, but just, for me, city girl, why is legalization not enough?
Well, legalization is not enough because of the experience that the industry had after IRCA in 1986, where we legalized, 1.2 million people, something on that order. And over time, many of them stayed in agriculture, but over time, a lot of them aged out. I think we all know that farm work is a younger person's occupation, and they also took their opportunity to move along and work in other industries. Over time, we wound up having fewer and fewer of those people who were legalized by IRCA working in the industry. But what we didn't fix on the backside with IRCA was the fraudulent document problem. They imposed the I-9 documentation requirement and didn't really pay any attention to the problem of fraudulent documentation. With the I-9 mandate, sprang up a gigantic market in those kinds of documents. So everybody has documents. It's just a question of what the provenance is. I think we all know that many times they're not legitimate documents, and that's our problem right now. Is we have a large portion of our labor force are people who are not legally documented to be here in the United States and working, and that's the problem we need to solve in the short run. In the longer run, we need to have something that will allow us to have a labor force for the future.
That's the key, right? I mean, so the people that are here are going to age out, they're going to move on to other industries, some of them. The big failure of IRCA wasn't just that it didn't create a good document system, it didn't create an avenue, a workable legal avenue for new people to come, right?
Yes, exactly.
Younger, new people, new fresh workers.
Exactly, and the H-2A program, the industry has a need for about 1.5 million workers every year on a national scope. The H-2A program emits about 60 to 90,000 depending on the year, so it's pretty obvious, I think, the H-2A program is not that solution to the problem. There is some usage of H-2A here in California, and anybody who's using it will tell you that it requires a tremendous financial commitment to be able to do that, and you have to have the right conditions to be able to make it work. And most farmers in California, I would guess, don't have those conditions to be able to do that.
Somebody, in the preparation for this event, somebody put it to me really well. They said, E-Verify is coming. Like, we know that any bill is going to have mandatory E-Verify. So the question is, what's the offset for mandatory E-Verify? If mandatory E-Verify is going to make it hard to, going to make it impossible, going to mean that everybody now can only hire people who are here legally, what's the program that's going to offset mandatory E-Verify?
And that's what we're hoping this is going to be for our industry. It's going to be the program that's going to be the offset to that problem. It was all conceived in the understanding that we were going to be at some point living in a world the day after mandatory universal E-Verify becomes the law of the land. And how are we going to cope with that? And I think the way potentially we can cope with that would be to have some way of granting some sort of legal status to the people who are here now, working in the industry with commitments and roots in their communities, married to people who are citizens or permanent legal residents, whose kids are citizens, who own homes or rent homes and are part of our communities. And the idea that you would ask those people to go back to a country that they've never really known, to touch back, whatever that means, and then re-enter the country with legal documentation never made sense in the first place and never will. So it gets back to the concept that you've heard people talk about, I'm sure, many times. We're really going to get 11 million people to all get on a bus and go back home, wherever home is. I think obviously that's not going to happen. So trying to find some sort of a system that isn't going to cause massive disruption to our industry in the process of fixing this problem is kind of the needle that we're trying to thread here in the policy sense.
And allow new legal workers to come so that when they give you your documents and you run them through E-Verify, they check. Yeah. Okay, so that's kind of why, twin purposes why, to deal with people already here and allow new people. So let's talk about let's give you an overview, kind of a roadmap. What's in this plan?
To try to make a long story as short as possible, the plan, and by the way, all this is still in very general terms at this point, as anything in the political realm in Washington tends to be. You put out some ideas, and then you go start talking to your opposition, and you start trying to figure out how to build coalitions across party lines. And so things can shift from time to time. The important thing is to preserve the things that you absolutely have to have as you're going forward trying to put something together. But The key component, I think, of the program to legalize the people who are already here is that you have to have some demonstration of attachment to the agricultural workforce.
Well, before you get into deep, just give me the big roadmap. What are like the, there's a living room, a dining room, and a kitchen. What are the roadmaps? There's legalization.
Legalization of the current workforce we already have here, a future flow program that will allow people to come to the country after, in the future, as the industry recognizes that it has needs to be able to fill for jobs that are going to need to be done in the future. And that will have a two-branch program. One is, all of it is going to be intended to be very market-based and market-oriented. What we were striving to do in crafting these ideas was to create some sort of a visa program that would, as closely as possible, mimic the labor markets that we already have with agricultural workers and agricultural employers in California, to not disrupt the system that we have now, where I think we do a pretty efficient job of allocating workers and jobs. And in order to not layer another layer of bureaucracy on top of that and interrupt it, we were trying to craft something that would disrupt that to the minimum degree possible. But we also need to recognize that there are some agricultural producers who would want to access that future flow program, who would need to have some assurance that those workers will actually stay for the full period of time that they need them to be there, or will actually come to the far ends of the migrant labor stream. And that's why the other branch of the program is intended to be something where the worker and the employer can choose to enter into an employment contract, and to have that contract be binding on both parties going forward, hopefully without all of the bureaucratic mess that goes along with employment contracts under the current H-2A program. Okay, so try to keep it as simple as possible. And the key thing with both of this is that all of this is essentially at-will employment. The worker can leave, except for the contract branch. The worker can leave when if they feel like what's going on at their place of work isn't serving their best interest. The employer can fire that worker if he feels like that worker's not performing, and you don't have all the restrictions on hiring and everything else that goes along with the current H-2A program.
Okay, so we're going to drill deeper on all the rooms, but just to be really clear about what the kind of blueprint is. So there's the legalization part, and then there's the future flow part, but the future flow part is divided into two things. One is a contract system, and one is an at-will system. Okay? So that's the headline, right? Legalization, and then future flow, but future flow with two branches, contract and non-contract. Okay, so now let's go explore the rooms. Sorry, to keep with the metaphor. Tell me about the legalization piece. How does it work, and what's going to be required of folks, and how's it different than it's been imagined in the past?
Well, actually, the legalization piece of it is going to be, if you spend any time studying the old ag jobs proposal, in many ways it's going to look a lot like that in terms of its structure. In order to qualify for legal status, you're going to need to be able to pass certain background checks. You're going to need to be able to demonstrate attachment to the industry as an agricultural worker in the past, as well as a future work obligation that will be what you will do in order to be able to qualify for the legal status that you will be conferred by the program. One of the questions that has been kicked around a lot, and I don't have an answer for it, but it's out there, so we might as well talk about the elephant sitting in the middle of the room, is whether or not these people are going to be offered a path to citizenship. That is a big question left unanswered at this point, both in terms of what we're talking about here for agriculture, as well as what's going to happen with the larger group of 11 million people who are here illegally as well.
And in the proposal, how's it?
It's not.
It's not.
It's not. It's a legal status, and it doesn't specify at this point whether or not they would have eligibility for citizenship later. We're not opposed to that idea, I don't think. It's just a question of how politically it needs to work out in order for everything to come together to create a bill that we can get passed through Congress. So in many ways, the legalization of current workers part looks very much like Title I of the ag jobs bills that we have worked with in the past.
Including a commitment to remain in agriculture.
Including a commitment to remain for some period of time.
And what is the period of time? Is that worked out?
At this point, no. That's flexible. It could be a certain number of days or a certain number of years, and a part of that is what the industry is going to find acceptable, and what our farmer advocacy groups and others that we're going to have to talk to, and what folks on Capitol Hill.
And that's going to be key point for everybody.
I think it will. Right? Yeah, I think it will. I think it will.
Still not yet decided. So that might be one question that'll be interesting to talk about later in the day, right? How long you need that period to be.
and how long the period of commitment to the industry, how long before you can qualify for the program, how long that period should
How
be.
much you've been done in the past.
And of course, we're still open to suggestion as to how that would work mechanically out here in the real world.
Okay, so now let's move and drill deep on the next part. And humor me, let's do the contract future flow first.
Yeah. Well, the contract. What's interesting about the way that the contract future flow and the non-contract future flow have evolved up to this point has been that many, other than the contract component, they're very similar to each other. In fact, there are a lot of people who believe that they should not be different in any material way, other than the allowance for the employer and the employee to enter into a contract. I think what you will probably wind up seeing is a lot of people some people who might otherwise use the H-2A program might gravitate toward that contract piece of the program. I think that people who have housing and have other infrastructure in place where they could use the H-2A program, they will find that to be an advantage to them in terms of recruiting workers. They can offer housing, they can maybe offer somewhat higher wages and other benefits. That will help them in the competition for workers to get people to come to, say, a remote area like Susanville or Tule Lake or someplace like that where workers might not otherwise go. So I think that's the key issue with the contract worker part of the program, is the purpose of it is to assure employers that if they bring workers in, they'll have the ability to be able to keep them for at least as long as they're going to need them.
For the summer, or whatever it is, the growing season.
Yeah, whatever the growing season is.
So you have a contract with the worker. So just pretend I'm applying and I'm going to use the contract piece. Like how will it work and how, without getting too much into the details, but how will it work and how will it be different from H-2A?
Well, the whole underlying structure of the program is going to be fundamentally different from H-2A in many ways. Principally, the program is going to be administered by the Department of Agriculture rather than the Department of Labor. I know to a lot of you in this room that probably sounds like a pipe dream. And we acknowledge the difficulty in getting that done, but we also think the Department of Labor has proved over and over again that it doesn't have the capacity or the desire to administer an agricultural guest worker program in a fair and even-handed way. So when you have when you have an employee who doesn't perform, what do? You fire him. Maybe we say it's time to fire the Department. It's time to fire the Department of Labor. At least with respect to the gatekeeper role that they play with the H-2A program or guest worker programs now, with respect to our program, rather than trust that to the Secretary of Agriculture, whose job would be to put out the call to agricultural employers to ask who wants to use the program, who anticipates a need to bring foreign workers in this year. That enumeration of agricultural employers will outline the universe of people who will be eligible to employ workers who will be brought into the country under the program. Those employers will probably, I'm guessing probably when all this is said and done, will have to have some sort of market test. They'll have to probably attest that they have attempted to recruit foreign workers, which attestation was one of the key features of the ag jobs reform.
So let's explain to people the difference between attestation and
okay, under the current H-2A program, you have to satisfy a bureaucrat who doesn't want to be satisfied, although we probably have more to say about that in a minute about how much fun it can be to try to satisfy the Department of Labor that you actually did meaningful recruitment and couldn't find any American workers. But what we can do now is you try to satisfy a bureaucrat who doesn't want to be satisfied that you actually did domestic recruitment in the usual ways that you recruit for farm workers. One of the things they usually say you need to do is to advertise in the local newspaper of general distribution in the area where you live. I don't know how effective a tool that is for actually recruiting agricultural workers, but that's one of the things the department insists upon. And you have to provide a whole lot of paperwork and a whole lot of background evidence to demonstrate that you actually did those things, that you used the local employment offices and the employment system to try to find workers in that way and post that job. And by and large, as I think anybody, if you know anything about the H-2A program, what you find is that very few domestic workers make themselves available, and those that do usually last about an hour. Or very small numbers of them actually wind up working to complete the season. So the result of that is that while the recruitment piece of H-2A now is usually, it's a waste of time and effort and energy and money on everybody's part, but it's done for a very specific reason, and that's to satisfy people who need to be satisfied that American workers are not being displaced by the importation of foreign workers. So I think there's going to need to be at least some sort of a cursory check to make sure there are not American workers available, some minimal recruitment requirements, and an attestation on the part of the grower that he met those minimum recruitment requirements, with the understanding that if you don't, you're making an attestation to the federal government very much like you're signing your tax return, certifying to the U.S. government that everything on that document, as far as you know, is truthful. So I think, to the degree that people may or may not hesitate to lie on their tax return, they may or may, I would hope they would,
and there'll be audits.
They would hesitate, and there will be audits enforcing that. And that's going to be the ongoing role of the Department of Labor.
So just to be clear, like rather than proving that you've done all this recruitment, you're going to say you did this recruitment, and then they're able to come check later.
Exactly.
So that's a distinct certification.
And attestation.
Yes. So we're going to have attestation. So, okay, so keep going. But you're kind of breaking the mold in some ways on this, on traditional guest worker programs, right? Because you have, what you described, registered employers and worker visas.
Okay. Well, the general idea behind this is that when an employer identifies himself as someone who wants to participate in the program, workers will then identify themselves on the opposite side of the border. We expect this probably will happen in a couple different ways. One will be through the usual conduits of information that workers and employers have now. And employees, of course, these are details that we haven't worked out yet because we don't really know what the general shape of the program is going to wind up being. But our expectation is that the normal channels of communication will be the channels of communication that will allow workers to identify themselves and to pair themselves up with employers in the United States. And the first employer that worker comes to the United States to work for will be the employer who will be not necessarily responsible for any inbound and outbound transportation or anything like that, but will be the first employer who will be in the line. And then after that, that worker will be able to go from employer to employer to employer, each of whom are registered to use the program with the Department of Agriculture. And nobody has any long-term commitment beyond what their perceived need is in terms of how you do that, when you do that, and what the time is. The only restriction will be that that worker has to be unemployed for no more than 30 days in between jobs. Otherwise, they'll be out of status and subject to deportation.
So let me try. This is how I sometimes describe it. Tell me if I'm wrong, but this is how I sometimes describe the very similar version that some folks are working on for non-ag workers. In the old days, employers sponsored workers, basically. That was kind of the relationship. And you sponsored the worker. You connected with him before he came, and you sponsored him, and you were responsible for him the whole time he was here. And you paid for his transit, you paid for his housing, and there was a kind of, one-to-one relationship. This time, instead of getting permission, the new system, instead of getting permission to hire worker X, you're getting permission for your job to be, you're becoming a registered employer, and you're a registered employer in the program, and there might be 3 or 4 registered employers in your neighborhood, and the worker comes first to work for you, but if he doesn't like you, and he doesn't like your job, and he decides to move on from your job, he can go work for another registered employer in the program from day one, and he can move to employer to employer to employer.
That's the essence of that whole employment, is that they can move when they feel the need to move, the desire to move. If they feel like, one of the complaints that farm worker advocates have always had about the H-2A program is that H-2A workers, they say, are essentially slaves because the employer has possession, if you will, of that worker's visa by virtue of the sponsor relationship. So what better way to break that, to take that argument away for the farm worker advocacy groups than to give the worker the opportunity to vote with his feet if he feels like he's not being treated appropriately by the employer he's working for, to move on to another employer who's eligible to employ him under the program. So the employer probably will be able to employ other workers who are not in the program, but the worker won't be able to work for anybody who's not certified to use the program. And if you do that, and of course that all will be managed by the process of E-Verify that we anticipate we'll be dealing with going forward, because all of this is working under the assumption that E-Verify will be up and running, and it's a reality we're going to have to figure out how to cope with. So the purpose of all of this is to answer that argument about the H-2A program being essentially a slave labor program. Well, we're going to give the workers the opportunity to break those chains of slavery and look after their own self-interest. Right now, the labor standards for the program, both branches of it, are what is required under state and federal law in your area for all the workers who work for you now. So in California, the minimum wage would be $8 an hour, although we know that think relatively few people actually earn $8 an hour, and earn more than that. And all the other labor standards and things you have to cope with in California. And it is true that for an employer working in Arizona as opposed to California, the labor standards he's going to have to meet will not be those we have to meet here in California. But we cope with those labor standards now, onerous as we may feel like they are, and other employers in other states don't have to cope with those standards. And it's pretty hard. I think that it makes sense for us to say we're going to continue to do what we're doing now. It might be nice to try to come up with a national standard that's somewhat less than our standards in California, but I just don't think that dog is going to hunt.
So that's very important, obviously, about the labor standards and the wage, but I just want to underline the piece about the kind of break the mold nature of the program. I mean, that's, you know, to get away from the slavery, from the indentured servitude, this notion that the workers can move, you know, if they don't like the employer, they can vote with their feet. Right. And that's kind of that's the big idea here, right? It's new. It makes us different from programs that have been used in the past. But if you want to have a contract with the guy, you can have a contract with him, and you can keep him for the whole season.
And if you want to have a contract, you can offer any other incentives for that, any other incentives that are legal for that worker to come to you. Housing, you can offer to help pay for their transportation. You can offer to do a whole variety of things because you're free to do that. You're not restricted from doing that.
Okay, so I want to open it to questions. We have a couple minutes left, but just before I do, my last question to you is: so, you know, what's next in DC? Where's this plan going? You're in conversations with labor, correct? And I don't know how much you can tell us about that, but tell us a little bit about conversations with labor, and also what can you tell us about how this is going to play out politically in Congress, you know, as we go forward?
Well, if I knew how it was going to play out in Congress, I wouldn't be here. I'd be in Washington tonight and have a nice office on K Street, and I'd be making a lot more money than I am now. But because I think it's very difficult to predict how it's going to play out politically. But at the moment, I can tell you that folks that represent our industry are talking to farm worker advocacy groups and others about the general shape of the program and, you know, who politically is willing to tolerate what and how we can move forward. Those talks are. As what I've heard about them is that they're proceeding, as you often hear discussions between Arabs and Israelis characterized as frank and open discussions. To the best of my knowledge, nobody's fired any Scud missiles at each other yet. So they're continuing to talk, and I think that's good news. They're continuing to talk. I think we have some time to get these things sorted out. And the reason I think that is that the AFL-CIO and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce are engaged in conversations right now about the broader 30,000-foot problem of the 11 million illegal. How do you create guest worker programs for high-tech workers and lower skilled workers and all the rest of that? I've heard varying reports that those talks have either broken down or gone on hiatus, like the Eagles went on hiatus for 14 years and then came back. So hard to know.
I'm actually part of those other talks.
Okay.
So and so don't believe everything you read in the paper about them. Let's say that. They're also we haven't thrown food at each other yet.
Okay.
I think we may come to a point where we're still talking, and I think we may come to a point where we agree on some basics. Don't solve the whole thing, but agree on some basics and kick it up to the members on the Hill.
Right.
Watch your screen. We'll learn more about that soon. But you're right in the sense that there's two sets of negotiations going on in Washington about business and labor. So one is about ag labor, and one is about non-ag low-skilled labor, like restaurant workers and construction workers and what have you. And they're kind of linked in the sense that you're looking at ours and we're looking at yours to see, you know, if somebody wins clearly in one of them, it's going to influence the other, and like that. But then eventually, are you guessing Senate first and House second? Is that kind of your big picture plan?
My sense of it is that the Senate can move a package, and if I had to bet, I would bet that the House will move an enforcement/STEM visas bill, science, technology, education, math visas. That the House probably has less inclination to move a big package, but if you get to conference, then literally all things become possible.
Yeah. I think you might be surprised by the House too. We'll see. But your champions in the Senate are, right now it's Senator Feinstein and Marco Rubio are doing the ag piece.
That's right. Yeah, Senator Schumer from New York and Senator Graham from South Carolina are kind of the two key leaders of the Gang of Eight that you've heard something about, that they released their plan a few weeks ago. And a subcommittee, if you will, of that Gang of Eight, Marco Rubio is kind of one of the leading Republican voices in that. But Rubio has also kind of taken a step back from that bigger plan, and he's working directly with Senator Feinstein to work on trying to craft the ag plan for something in the Senate. And the good news there is that after many years of not having a Republican dancing partner for Senator Feinstein, we finally have a Republican who can work with him. And again, I would emphasize to you, this is a Republican who said it's pretty hard to have a conversation with Hispanic voters about your common values when they think you want to deport their mother. So this is someone who understands the problem, represents a big ag state, understands the nature of the solution, and is, from everything I've heard, is friendly to the kinds of solutions that we've been talking about we think will work for the industry.
Okay, so there are lots of questions, but let's open it up to questions. Oscar.
Just had a quick couple.
And why don't you tell us all who you are, because
okay,
I'm not sure how many.
Oscar Ramos, representing Bravo Ag Group, president of Bravo Ag Group.
Our sponsor. Thank you again.
Yeah, my voice is a little
Here
bit.
comes the microphone to help you.
Yeah, okay. Sorry, my voice is a little hoarse, but Brian, I wanted to say that I'm sure that some of the guys that are running a successful H-2A program might not agree with you that they are running a modern-day slave operation.
I didn't say that.
Okay, it just sounded like it. Another thing, too, I would also say that maybe you give me some feedback, maybe tomorrow also. If there already exists an H-2A program, and it would seem redundant to approach other avenues, maybe to modify an H-2A program that would maybe make it better for us to streamline getting people here and helping us with our contracts as well. What's your take on that, on the current H-2A program, whether or not it can be modified?
What can the H-2A program be modified? Do we have to, why start over with a blank piece of paper, or why not fix the program we got?
It's already in existence, so it would seem obvious to really work at that level instead of creating a whole new avenue through another department.
And just before Brian answers, in the second session, we're going to have the largest H-2A user in the country is going to be up here talking from North Carolina, and he'll talk a little bit about how he thinks the new idea, fits with what he does and why it's an improvement and stuff like that. So we're going to address this again. This is the first bite of the apple.
Oscar, there are a couple of reasons for that. One is the experience that a lot of H-2A users have had dealing with the current administration and the arbitrary decisions that they make, or the arbitrary non-decisions that they make, the delays that they put in certifications and other key bottlenecks in the program. Things that have led many people, I know maybe perhaps not all, but many people who are using the program to believe that it is to the point that it can't be fixed anymore, that it is beyond repair, particularly that it is beyond repair for the vast mass of agricultural employers who are going to need to have access to some kind of a guest worker program in the future. I think it's important to recognize that historically the H-2A program has brought in between 60 and 90,000 workers a year. 90,000 is about the top end number that I've ever heard for the program. This is for an industry that employs 1.5 million people. If you are familiar, and if you're using the program, I know you are familiar with the bureaucracy that goes along with the H-2A program, where you've got to try to shove your applications and certifications through 3 different executive departments to get your workers in country in time for you to use them. It's pretty hard for me to imagine, for example, the Chicago National Processing Center, and Charlene Giles and Bill Carlson and those folks at the Department of Labor being able to cope with enough applications to admit 1.5 million workers. I think the system would blow up if you tried to do that.
But and correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't the contract piece of the new program, it's kind of the best of H-2A, abstracted and continued. I mean, different, but taking the best of H-2A is modeled.
To the extent that our working groups had participation with people who work with the H-2A program, one of the things they like about the program is the degree of certainty that it offers you. To the degree that you can go to the Department of Labor and get any meaningful certainty out of that. But once you have your workers, you have your workers. And that was an attempt to try to preserve that.
Okay, so and Lee Wicker will talk more about this in the second panel.
So,
really good question.
Brian, thank you very much. And also, that's that's you answered my question. And again, it still would seem that H2A would be the way to go at this point. I don't know. I guess I'm not involved in those talks. So.
I can tell you that you might be right. If this whole thing blows up, that will be the only game in town.
Well, I guess what I'm saying is that not only that, now DOL is still going to be involved on the compliance side because it's still got to carry out the NISPA law. So I don't know.
Yeah, this conversation will continue all day. Really good question and good to get us going in that direction. Lupe involved in this, and he went through a long litany of things where he said, I've never seen members so interested in this. I've never heard Republicans talk about it so positively. I've never seen so much energy from the White House. I've never, seen the tea leaves look so good and the stars be so aligned. And he went on with a long, long list of things, sort of like you did, of good things. And then he said, so what's my assessment of the chances? 5%. And I give it better than that. But there's no question it's going to be hard. It's definitely going to be hard, and everybody's going to get part of what they want, but not everything of what they want. But that said, starting with some pessimism, starting with some skepticism, or a lot of skepticism, it's true that both parties, I don't think I've been in any office in the past 2 months where no matter how Democrat, Republican, Senate, House, pro-immigration, anti-immigration, where they didn't say, and I think mean it, we've got to do something. Everybody up there gets, we've got to do something. And, let's face it, it's for political reasons, it's because of the Latino vote, and it's the Democrat, the president sees his legacy, and Republicans see their future. They know they've got to do something. Are they going to do the right thing? That's a lot harder. But I have not seen, even including, I would say, in 06 and 07, and I was very close to it in 06 and 07, I have not seen so much momentum around, we've got to address it. And very serious negotiations going on. And, the Gang of 8, I'm working very closely with all those offices, mostly the Republicans, I'm a Republican, but some of the Democrats, they are in serious talks. And there's no question, there's going to be people who say don't do it at all, and there's going to be people who, want to kind of screw up the deal because of what they want, and business and labor, that's a big, hard part of it. But the chances are, the seriousness and the intensity with which people are addressing it, I have not seen. And I think ag is in a pretty good position. They're not better than the Silicon Valley people, as Fred Francis said, they're in the best position of all the industries. Like, definitely everybody gets something. But ag is second after that. Pretty much everybody gets ag is really needs these workers, And when you talk about restaurants and you talk about construction and you talk about home health care, people think, if only you paid $1 more, my cousin would do it. They don't want to do it, and they don't want their kids to do it, but they say, if only you paid $1 more, my cousin would do it. Ag, most people kind of know their cousin doesn't want it, even their cousin doesn't want to do it. So, we'll see.
Lupe, as you have a talent for doing, you got to the heart of the matter, and that is that immigration is hard. It splits both parties about 3 different ways, and that makes it extremely difficult to come up with a consensus opinion about what needs to be done. And one of the things I learned in 20 years of working in D.C. before I came to California is that Republicans and Democrats won't do anything even remotely controversial until they can figure out a way to hold hands and jump off the cliff together, because they're going to want political cover in order to get that done. With that said, you have to remember there are 100 members of the Senate, 435 members of the House, and you don't need all of them to get this done. You do need about 60 of them in the Senate. And if you look at the membership of the Gang of 8, you've got a pretty good start on starting with the 55 Democrats have, most of whom will be in favor of immigration reform of some kind, with some exceptions, and enough of the Republicans that you might be able to count. You've got a pretty good chance of being able to count to 60. In the House, you probably need to get to about 235, so that when they call the vote and the members are all milling around down there in the well of the House and they're horse trading, that there'll be enough people that can decide, well, I was going to vote for it, but now I'm not because I don't have to walk out on that plank, but they'll still have enough to be able to get to 218. And I've had the privilege, the dubious privilege of watching them make sausage when they're doing votes like that. It's pretty interesting what they'll trade for just to get to 218. People wind up getting, well, they make all kinds of wild deals, let me put it to you that way. So with all of that said, I'm a little more optimistic than the member that Tamara was talking to. I think we've got about a 50-50 shot here at getting this done. There's more momentum than I can ever remember, and I've been working on this since about 1995. I think that you've got one major political party really wants to do this, and I think they see it as a matter of their long-term survival. The other political party says they want to do it, and we'll see whether they really want to do it or not, if they'd really rather have an issue that they can talk about. So I think when it comes right down to it, Lupe, you're right, the politics are hard. That's the reason why the stars only align about once every 2 generations to do something here. And one last point, to emphasize the critical importance of unity. We got IRCA in '86 with the SAW program that legalized a bunch of people who later went on, many of whom later went on and worked in other industries, never triggered the replacement agricultural worker program that was supposed to replace those workers after they aged out and moved on because of the plethora of fraudulent documents that the I-9 process helped to create. And then we got a redheaded bastard stepchild of an H-2A program that's never worked really for the vast bulk of the industry, with apologies to you, Lee. I know you've
And all the redheaded people in the audience.
and any redheaded people in the audience. And that happened because the industry split west and southeast. And because the industry couldn't present a unified voice as to what it wanted, Congress came up with it for us. And we cannot afford to have that happen again. We're not going to get very many more bites at this apple. And so we can't come together as an industry and figure out what we want and clearly communicate that to members of Congress that are going to be moving these bills, then we're going to wind up getting something that probably isn't going to work very well for us.
And yeah, I just want to underline that. I agree with you about on 50-50, that's about where I am too. I agree with you that there's danger that anti-immigrant Republicans won't help us, but there's also danger, you didn't name them, but that Democrats really want this as a political issue rather than to solve it. So there's danger on both sides. But the most important thing you said is that you all are really important, right? Because it needs unity, but also these members need to hear from you, right, about this. You need to be united, and they need to hear from you. I mean, that's the most important thing we're going to say all day long. Chances are hard, but the chances will improve if you get in the face of your congresspeople and tell them they need to be part of this and need to do it. But that's like the bottom line for the whole day. Yes, please. Tell us who you are.
Leslie Moreland, Grizzly Creek Management. We're a migratory beekeeper. We beekeep in California, North Dakota, and Mississippi. I'm curious, I'm also a California almond grower, so I understand the heft of California agriculture. How is this going to come together nationally? My thought is things that only come from California look too West Coast-ish, and the rest of the world doesn't like it looking that way.
So just explain that.
I think the critical role that the Agricultural Workforce Coalition plays in this is that it brings people from all over the country together. And I think one of the reasons why the creation of that coalition is important is that I think one of the players it brings in is the American Farm Bureau that has reach into all 50 states and into virtually every county in the United States with the County Farm Bureau organization. So that and all the major national agricultural groups that are involved in the Agricultural Workforce Coalition, its purpose is to show that we're trying to bring national unity to the table on this and talk about what the industry as a whole needs all over the country, try to solve this problem for everybody in agriculture, as opposed to being a West Coast solution or an East Coast solution to avoid the exact situation I just described that happened to us in 1986.
Yeah, I think maybe we weren't clear. The 30,000 different discussions we've been talking about actually started with a group of state Farm Bureau reps from a lot of different states. Brian was part of it from California. The guy who actually organized it was a guy from New Jersey, sort of led it was a guy from New Jersey. There were people from Washington. There were people from, I think, Florida. So the nucleus, the beginning of those 30,000 conversations was people from a bunch of different states. And one of the reasons there's this emphasis on contract and not contract is because contract is very popular in the Southeast and
I would only add one thing to that, and I think it's important to understand, is that what we did internally with the Farm Bureau was to try to come up with some ideas that we thought all the state farm bureaus could get behind. And when we took it to the AFBF Board of Directors, they ratified that we had done a good job and that we did come up with something that all the states could get behind. All that really accomplished was giving our people in Washington the carte blanche that they needed to start talking to everybody else in agriculture in Washington, to start trying to bring everybody together. And I think everybody recognized pretty quickly the value of unity. And so it wasn't just, we didn't do this, we just put American farmers in a position that they could participate in it. And so that, I think, is the important thing, is that folks recognize that this is our moment. And if we let this moment go by, it's something we're going to wind up regretting for a long time, I think.
Let's have one more question, and then you'll have plenty of opportunity to talk as we go forward. Dan, please identify yourself.
Good morning, Brian. Dan Leonard, Bronco Wine Company. The plan that you're talking about in Washington, your hope is that it's going to be administered by the Department of Agriculture instead of Department of Labor. Regardless of which department administers it, is there going to be quotas? Are there going to be quotas by industry? Is it going to be by commodity? What's the thinking going on?
Good question. We let that out.
Our proposal calls for an uncapped program, in the same way that the H2A program now is uncapped. I think we know from experience that one of the big problems we had with the H2B program, which is the H2A program counterpart for non-agricultural workers, is that it has a ridiculously tight cap. And so for many years now, as soon as they open up for applications at the beginning of the year, the program is fully subscribed by 5 o'clock that day. So that's something you can't have. When I was in the Department of Labor, I helped engineer a compromise so that they at least saved half of the visa cap for the second half of the year. So folks that had a summer need for workers at least had a chance, but that went away because of the vagaries of politics in Congress. So that is a clear, the experience with the H-1B program, where they kept limiting it to 65,000 people for an industry that could employ hundreds of thousands of software engineers from all over the world, to maybe have gotten the iPhone 4 to work right the first time, or the 5 to work right the first time. So, the point is, quotas are an artificial political construct, and we're certainly not going to start with that.
Okay, so give me one word answer, or 2 or 3 word answer. What do you think your chances are of coming out with an uncapped program? I understand that's what you're starting with, but can you put 50-50, 70-30? What's the chance of coming out with an uncapped program?
I think we can make a pretty good argument for an uncapped program. And if we wind up having to accept the cap, it's going to have to be a big one, because the industry has too much need for too many workers for a cap in 5 figures to ever be able to work in a reasonable way. I think we can help folks understand that when we look at the national character of our industry.
Okay, I'm into that. If we didn't get, Oscar, one last
Just one last quick question, Brian. It's for you. Brian, it seems to me, though, there's a lot of organizations working on a program. At the end of the day, who's going to get the program to go through, I guess?
I think if everyone's going to pull together, is the answer.
I think that it happens because they all work together. That again gets back to the theme of unity. If the industry is split, and we have some organizations saying we want this and others saying we want that, we're going to wind up with a mess again, like we did in '86. And what I'd like to avoid, and again with apologies to Lee, I know I keep denigrating the H2A program, and I'm sorry, I know you guys have a great business running it and all that, but I just don't see it working for a lot of folks in California. So that's why we're trying to try to build a better mousetrap here. And building a better mousetrap is going to require unity across the industry.